I went to return a screwdriver. That's the whole reason I knocked on her door. A screwdriver. Red handle. Borrowed 3 weeks ago. Been sitting on my kitchen counter so long I'd started thinking of it as decoration. I knocked at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night. She opened the door, looked at me once, and said, "You picked the right night to show up." I didn't know what that meant. By midnight, I wished I didn't. I don't post much, but when I do, it's always something that actually happened and actually mattered. Subscribe if that's your thing, like if this one stays with you. And don't leave early. This story earns itself. I want to be honest with you about the kind of night it was before I knocked on that door. It was nothing. That's the honest answer. It was the specific kind of nothing that fills up a Wednesday when you live alone and your job ends at 4:30 and dinner takes 11 minutes and suddenly it's 8 p.m. and you've got the TV on, but you stopped watching it an hour ago and you're just sitting there in the sound of it like it's company. That was me most nights. That had been me for 14 months. My name's Garrett. I'm 36. I inspect water pipes for the county. I drive out to different sites, check infrastructure, file reports, go home. It sounds exactly as interesting as it is. I drove 214 miles that Wednesday, talked to 3 people. None of those conversations I could tell you a single word of right now. I live in Unit 7 at Clover Ridge, ground floor, end unit, brown brick building off Route 9 in Harwick, Ohio. If you know Harwick, you're already nodding. If you don't, imagine the town that exists between 2 towns you've actually heard of. There's a Casey's, there's a Dairy Queen, there was a Kmart. The Kmart's been gone since 2009, and the building is still just sitting there, with the sign brackets still on the facade like the town never fully accepted what happened. I moved into Unit 7 14 months ago when my dad died. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now. What I'll say is, he left me a little money, enough to stop renting a room from my buddy Terrence and get my own place for the first time in my life at 35. And I moved in with a duffel bag and his old blue baseball cap that I started wearing without planning to, and I've been wearing it ever since. I've got it on in my work photos. I wore it to Terrence's birthday in March. I don't think about it when I put it on. I think about it constantly. The apartment's mine, but it doesn't feel like mine yet. There's a shelf I bought from a hardware store in September, still flat-packed against the wall in the living room. There's a patch above the kitchen window where the previous tenant had something mounted and left a hole I keep meaning to spackle. I've got 4 things on the refrigerator: a takeout menu, a baseball practice schedule, a parking permit, and a photo of my dad from 2019 at a Cleveland game, laughing at something off camera. I don't know why I'm telling you the layout of my apartment. I think I want you to understand the specific texture of a life that's functional, and nothing more than that. Everything works. The lights come on, the hot water runs. I get up and go to work and come home and eat and watch something and go to bed. 14 months of that. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I knocked on my neighbor's door to borrow a screwdriver. Her name was Noreen. Unit 8, right next to mine, shared wall. I'd talked to her maybe 4 times since I moved in. She was the kind of neighbor who was just always somehow aware of everything happening in the building without ever making a thing of it. Knew everybody's schedule by sound. The kind of woman you get the feeling doesn't miss much, and you're not always sure how you feel about that. She was 54, divorced, kept to herself in the way that feels chosen rather than accidental. There's a difference, and you can tell. She worked from home doing something with numbers. I'd see her leaving sometimes early in the morning with coffee in a travel mug, walking to her car with the exact energy of someone who has already solved 3 problems before 7 a.m. I borrowed the screwdriver 3 weeks before that Wednesday. Needed a Phillips head for the shelf I still haven't put up. She handed it to me at the door without ceremony, just opened up, produced it, said, "Bring it back whenever," in a tone that suggested she genuinely did not care if she ever saw it again. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, next to the dish soap. Then next to a stack of mail. Then on its own after I dealt with the mail. Just this red-handled screwdriver on my counter being the only thing in the apartment that belonged to someone else. That Wednesday night I picked it up at 9 p.m. and I stood there holding it and I thought, I should return this. Not urgent, not guilty, just restless in the particular way that hits when the nothing of an evening gets too loud and you need to stand up and move your body 12 feet in any direction. I put on my dad's cap, walked out into the hallway, knocked on her door. And everything about the next 3 hours I did not see coming. She took a second to answer, not long, maybe 5 seconds. But the kind of 5 seconds where you become suddenly aware that it's 9 p.m. on a Wednesday and you're standing in a hallway holding a screwdriver, and maybe this is a strange thing to be doing. Then the door opened. Noreen was in a gray Henley and jeans, barefoot, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was holding, and I noticed this immediately, a dish towel. But her hands weren't wet, and there were no dishes. She'd just been holding it. Standing in her kitchen holding a dish towel at 9 p.m., like she'd picked it up an hour ago and never found a reason to put it down. She looked at me. Then she looked at the screwdriver, then back at me. And she said, "You picked the right night to show up." Her voice was flat when she said it. Not flat like nothing, flat like a lot of things compressed into very little space. I said, "I just came to return this." She said, "I know what you came for." And then she stepped back and opened the door wider and said, "Come in." And here's the thing. I should have just handed her the screwdriver. That was the entire mission. Hand it over, say goodnight, go back to my TV I wasn't watching. Simple. I went in. I don't fully know why. I think sometimes your body makes a decision your brain hasn't caught up to yet. My body decided to walk through that door and I followed it. Her apartment was the same layout as mine. Same bones, different life. Where I had flat-packed furniture and a dad's cap on a hook and 4 things on the refrigerator, she had lived in everything. Bookshelves that went floor to ceiling on the far wall, double-stacked in places, paperbacks jammed horizontal on top of upright hardcovers. A kitchen table made of some dark wood, old and scarred in a way that meant it had been somewhere before this. Herbs growing on the windowsill. I counted 3 different ones without meaning to. And on the counter, next to where she'd clearly been standing before I knocked, a glass of something amber. Bourbon, I found out later. 1 glass, half finished. It smelled like coffee and rosemary in there. And something else underneath. Something I can only describe as a house that had been fully lived in for a long time and was now being lived in by less than it was built for. I recognized that smell. It was the same smell as my apartment, and I hadn't known it had a smell until I was standing in its twin. "Sit down," she said, walking to the kitchen. "I really just came to—" "Garrett." She said my name like she'd said it before, like it was a word she had a history with. "Sit down." I sat. She brought out a second glass without asking, and poured 2 fingers of bourbon and set it in front of me, and sat across the table, and looked at me the way people look at you when they've already decided something. "You look like your dad," she said. I went very still. "The hat," she said. "I saw him when he helped you move in, before he—" She stopped, adjusted. "You've got the same way of standing." Nobody had said that to me in 14 months. Nobody had mentioned him in a specific physical way like that. Not his laugh, not his hands, not the way he stood. Like he was a real person who had a body that existed and moved through space and resembled mine. I picked up the glass and drank and didn't say anything. She let me not say anything. That was the first thing she did that I wasn't prepared for. We didn't start with anything real. That's not how it works with 2 people who don't do this. We started with the building. She told me the parking lot light had been flickering for 4 months, and she'd called maintenance twice, and both times they said they'd send someone, and both times nobody came. I told her I'd noticed. She said the guy in Unit 3 played guitar badly every Sunday morning. Not badly like learning, badly like he'd been playing for years and simply never improved. I said I'd heard it. She said she'd actually started to find it comforting, which she was not proud of. I laughed. First real laugh of that Wednesday, maybe longer. She didn't smile big, just the corners of her mouth, briefly, like she was rationing it. Then she refilled both glasses without asking again, and there was a pause that had weight to it. And she said, "You want to know what right night means?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "I do." She looked at the table for a moment, ran her thumb along a groove in the wood. Old habit, I could tell. Something she did when she was deciding how much to say. 8 years ago today, she said, I signed my divorce papers. She said it clean. No wobble, no performance. Just a fact she was handing me. I don't commemorate it, she said. I don't do anything with it. But every year this particular Wednesday shows up on the calendar, and I spend it standing in my kitchen, holding a dish towel apparently. I looked at the dish towel she'd set on the table. She looked at it too. Cray, she said. That was his name. Crawford, she explained. He wasn't a bad man. That's almost the harder version of it, you know? Bad men give you something to push against. Cray just drifted. And I let him because I was busy being capable, and capable people don't ask for things. They just handle things. And by the time I looked up, we were two people splitting a cable bill and nothing else. She took a drink. 8 years, she said. And I still stand in this kitchen on this Wednesday like I'm waiting for something to come tell me what I did with all that time. The apartment was very quiet. Outside somewhere, a car door closed. The refrigerator hummed. I could hear the particular silence of a life that runs well and means less than it should. I knew that silence. I'd been sleeping inside it for 14 months. My dad, I said. She looked at me. He died 14 months ago, and I stopped, started again. I got up the next day and I went back to work 4 days later because what else do you do? And I moved into this place, and I coach baseball on Saturdays because he did it. And I wear his hat every day, and I haven't actually... I put the glass down. I haven't actually sat with it, I said. Not once. 14 months, and I haven't sat with it for longer than about 30 seconds before I find something to do with my hands. Noreen looked at me for a long moment. What are you doing with your hands right now? She said. I looked down. I was holding the screwdriver. I'd been holding it the whole time without realizing. Turning it over in my hands, end over end, something to do, something to hold. I set it on the table. It sat there between us. There it is, she said quietly. Not mean, not therapeutic, just witnessing. And something about being witnessed by someone who wasn't trying to fix it, wasn't performing sympathy, wasn't shifting uncomfortably and changing the subject. Something about that cracked something open in my chest that I had been keeping sealed with work and routine and documentaries I never finished. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I didn't cry. And she wasn't looking at me like she expected me to. She just sat there in the kitchen of her apartment on the anniversary of her own particular loss and let me exist in it without making it smaller or larger than it was. After a while, she got up and turned on the stove and made coffee without asking if I wanted any. I watched her move around the kitchen. Efficient, practiced, no wasted movement. The rosemary on the windowsill, the scarred table, the bourbon glasses. She set a mug in front of me. It had something printed on it that had faded to almost nothing. I could make out one word. Enough. Just that one word left. I didn't ask about it. Some things you know aren't yours to ask about. She sat back down and wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "Can I tell you something that's going to sound strange?" "Yeah," I said. "I think capable people grieve worse than anyone," she said, "because the whole architecture of your personality is built on not needing. And grief is nothing but need. It's just pure, unmanageable need. And we don't have anywhere to put it, so we put it in hats and baseball practice and borrowed screwdrivers we don't return for 3 weeks." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at her mug. But she was talking about both of us. I knew it. She knew it. The kitchen knew it. "The screwdriver," I said. "The dish towel," she said. And then, I don't know why, we both laughed. Not polite laughter, real laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere true, the kind that has grief in it and relief in it, and the absurdity of being human in it all at once. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then it faded, and the kitchen was quiet again. But it was different quiet. Quieter in a better way. The way a room feels after a window's been opened and closed again. Something had moved through. We sat there until the coffee was gone. We talked about smaller things after that. Her bookshelf, my dad's baseball teams, the Casey's on Route 9 that somehow has the best breakfast sandwiches in the county, which makes no geographical sense. Regular things. But they felt different now. Like words between people who'd actually met each other, instead of just occupied adjacent space. At 11:47, she looked at the clock on the microwave and then back at me and said, "You should probably sleep. You look like a man who doesn't sleep enough." "I don't," I said. "How can you tell?" "Because I don't either," she said, and I recognized the eyes. I stood up, put on my jacket. She walked me to the door the way people walk you to the door when they've decided you're worth that much. Not rushing it, not extending it either, just present. I picked up the screwdriver from the kitchen table. She raised an eyebrow. "It's yours," I said. "You need it for your shelf." "The shelf will get done," I said. And I meant it, which surprised me. She took it. Looked at it briefly like it was something she was seeing correctly for the first time. turned it over once, set it on the counter next to the herbs. "Good night, Garrett," she said. "Good night, Noreen," I said. And then I was in the hallway. The fluorescent light was doing its thing, steady and indifferent, same as always. Same brown carpet, same faint smell of someone's cooking from 3 doors down. Same building I'd been walking through for 14 months without registering any of it. I stood there for a minute, maybe longer. I wasn't thinking anything specific. That's the honest answer. I wasn't having a revelation. I wasn't restructuring my grief or deciding to become a different person. I was just standing in a hallway in Harwick, Ohio, at midnight on a Wednesday, and for the first time in 14 months the quiet wasn't pressing against me. It was just quiet. I went back to my apartment, took off my dad's cap and held it for a second before hanging it on the hook. Looked at the shelf flat-packed against the wall. Sat down on the floor in front of it. Not to build it, just to sit with it. The way Noreen sat with her dish towel and her 1 glass of bourbon on a specific Wednesday every year. Not performing, not fixing. Just being in the presence of a thing that meant something. I sat there for a while. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before I knocked on that door. Capable people don't grieve less. They just get better at scheduling it for later and later and later until it starts showing up sideways. In hats they can't stop wearing. In shelves they can't finish building. In screwdrivers they hold in both hands at a stranger's kitchen table without realizing they're doing it. And sometimes the only thing that breaks that open isn't therapy or time or some dramatic moment of reckoning. Sometimes it's a woman with a dish towel who pours you 2 fingers of bourbon you didn't ask for and says your father's name like he was a real person who stood a specific way and looked a specific way and left a specific shaped hole in the world. Sometimes it's 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. Sometimes it's a $4 screwdriver with a red handle. Sometimes you knock on the wrong door. And it turns out it was the only right one. If this one got to you, you know where the like button is. And if you want more of this, I'll see you next time.